Now, if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by Google's upcoming page experience signal, then please don't, because in this video, I'll dive deep into the core web vitals and why they're so important. I'll be stepping through how our website achieved 97% in the Google PageSpeed Insights mobile test. And here's a little hint, it was largely through core web vitals optimization. So in this video, you'll learn what the core web vitals are, how to measure them, and you'll discover opportunities of how to improve the scores on your website. Hey, it's Joe Williams from Tribe SEO, and I'm here to help your business get better results from SEO. Okay, so this is the second in our 5-part video series on Google's Page Experience Update. In the first video, we highlighted that page experience will soon be a new Google ranking factor that rolls out in May 2021. The video also highlights what the original signals are and how to parse them. This time around, I'll be focusing on the new signals, which are collectively known as core web vitals. But before we start, I just want to showcase my experience in this area. Back at the end of 2020, and after completing my epic Learn SEO Fast course, I decided a celebration was in order. So I took the task of completely redesigning our website myself, and with one goal in mind, to make it faster and score higher for the core web vitals. I stuck with WordPress, and you can see our homepage is pretty long. It contains a lot of images, 9 videos, and a live chat. All things that if you're not too careful can slow your website down to a snail's pace. But I'm pleased to say that after some tinkering and late nights, the results were pretty amazing. But first, let's scoot over to Google PageSpeed Insights tool and see how our old websites fared before any core web vitals optimization took place. Its performance score was a mere 30%. Now, I don't know if you've had a chance to run your website through the Google PageSpeed Insights tool lately, but I know many website owners have experienced scores that they weren't happy with either. Well, as of this recording, and when I run our new and improved homepage through Google PageSpeed Insights, I'm pleased to say the results are quite different. It's now scoring 97% when run from a mobile device, and 100% when run from a desktop. Now, I want to stress it's the mobile score that you need to pay attention to because that's what Google will be using in its page experience signal. Since Google's mobile-first indexing update, both indexing and ranking are based on the mobile version of your web pages, not the desktop. But why am I telling you about my high score? Well, I'm not saying it to brag, I'm saying it because the key ingredients to a high Google PageSpeed Insights score are getting the core web vitals right, and that's what I'll cover in this video. Okay, so what are the core web vitals? The core web vitals consist of 3 metrics that, when optimized, improve the user experience and SEO ranking potential of a web page. And the core web vitals are a subset of Google's page experience signal and measure how visitors interact with a web page and their perceived experiences. So, what's the first core web vital? Largest contentful paint, LCP, is the first core web vital, and according to web.dev website, which Google has put together, largest contentful paint is an important user-centric metric for measuring perceived load speed because it marks the point in the page load timeline when the page's main content has lightly loaded. A fast LCP helps reassure the user that the page is useful. Now, in the past, many page speed tools focused on measuring the load time, and this is the time taken for all the requests that make up a web page to load. So requests include all the images that you see on the page and the text which is part of the HTML. It also includes scripts that get fired in the background. For example, if your website has a live chat widget, it's likely to be created in JavaScript. And it also includes the CSS of the page, which provides its look and feel. Now, when you add them all up and calculate the page load time, it's not a true reflection of when the page actually became useful for your visitors. Largest contentful paint aims to tackle this by indicating when a web page looks useful to your visitors. So, how is LCP measured? Well, according to Google, the largest contentful paint metric reports the render time of the largest image or text block visible within the viewport. Okay, so it's the largest image or text element, But what is the viewport? Well, the viewport is the visible area of a web page on a device. If it's on your smartphone, it's the part of the page you see before scrolling. So let's look at two examples. The first is from Tribe SEO's homepage, and the second is for a Google query about one of its co-founders, Larry Page. So here's a test. Can you tell what's the largest contentful paint for each web page? I'll give you a moment. Okay, if you thought the main image on the Tribe SEO website is the LCP, you'd be right. However, if you said the main image on the Google page was the LCP, you'd be wrong. That's because it's actually 3 smaller images rather than one larger one. So in Google's case, the text block takes up more room than any of the images, and it takes the title of largest contentful paint. So what's considered a good LCP score? Well, according to Google and from a mobile device, 2.5 seconds or less is considered a good score. Between 2.5 and 4 seconds is moderate but needs improvement, and over 4 seconds is considered poor. Now, you may be wondering, how do you measure and optimize for the largest contentful paint? Bear with me, I'll get to that in a moment. But now it's time for the next Coolweb Vitals First Input Delay, FID. Google says first input delay is an important user-centric metric for measuring load responsiveness because it quantifies the experience users feel when trying to interact with unresponsive pages. A low FID helps ensure that the page is usable. Okay, that was a bit of a mouthful, but what does it mean? Well, FID measures the time it takes when a user interacts with an unresponsive web page, such as when they click on a button or a link, to the time it takes for the browser to respond to that interaction. Now, if you've ever visited a web page and quickly clicked on a button, but it took an eternity to load, it's likely due to a poor FID. So you can see having a fast first input delay goes a long way in offering a great user experience on your website. So what is a good FID score? Well, according to Google and from a mobile device, 100 milliseconds or less is considered good. Between 100 and 300 milliseconds is moderate but needs improvement, and over that is considered poor. Okay, so let's look at the final Coolweb Vital, Cumulative Layout Shift, CLS. Google says cumulative layout shift is an important user-centric metric for measuring visual stability because it helps quantify how often users experience unexpected layout shifts. A low CLS helps ensure that the page is delightful. Okay, to showcase this, let's look at one of Google's playful examples. Imagine you're visiting London and you want to buy a map of the Underground. You're on a website that sells maps and you're deep into the checkout process. You're ready to buy, and of course, you only need one map. However, you notice 56 of them are added, and when asked if this is correct, you quickly move to press no, but the layout of the page shifts, and as a result, you click yes. Oh boy, how frustrating. Now, this is an extreme example, and more often the shifts can be subtle. For example, Google fonts are typically hosted on Google, so it's common practice to load a more standard web font first, such as Times New Roman, which then gets replaced by the more attractive web font. One downside of this approach is that because all web fonts are slightly different sizes, it results in the text shifting. And this is particularly noticeable on a slower internet connection, which you often get from a mobile device. And more significant layout shifts can happen for several reasons. If a web page contains advertisements, there is often a delay in loading them, resulting in larger layout shifts. So you want all the elements of your web pages to remain in their starting position and not shift around as the page loads. So what's a good CLS score? Well, according to Google, 0.1 or less is considered good, between 0.1 and 0.25 is moderate but needs improvement, and over 0.25 is considered poor. Okay, so now that we've covered the free Coolweb Vitals, how do you measure them? Well, web.dev has a great resource. It lists an array of Google tools that allow you to measure the Coolweb Vitals of your web pages. If you have access to Google Search Console, that's a great place to start, but it relies on Google collecting enough data about your website, and it won't work very well for new pages. So to keep things simple and to make this accessible to all, let's check out Google's PageSpeed Insights report. Now, I'm going to copy the URL of this Core Web Vitals tools page, which is from a site created by Google to see how it fares in its own tool. So if Google is testing our web pages, it's only fair if we try one of its own, right? Okay, I'll pop the URL into the PageSpeed Insights tool and press Analyze. Right off the bat, you can see Google provides itself with a performance score of 74% and says, over the previous 28 days collection period, the aggregated experience of all pages served from the origin does not pass the Core Web Vitals assessment. So be warned, even Google struggles to pass this test. Although I have to say, this test was run a couple of weeks before publishing the video, and when I check now, Google has since made improvements to its score. Now, one important thing to note, the performance score is calculated using lab data. So while this is carried out in real time, it's not from real-life experiences that your visitors face, but instead a simulated environment in a computer lab controlled by Google. If Google collects enough data about your website, you'll also see field data collected from real-life experiences, so actual visitors from Google Chrome to your website. That said, because lab data is real-time, it's really useful when debugging issues and testing page speed tweaks to your site, while field data is better at seeing how your website has actually performed in the wild over 28 days. So let's now review the free Core Web Vitals. For largest contentful paint and looking at the field data, we can see the page score was 2.6 seconds. It's 0.1 seconds over the good threshold, so it narrowly misses out on getting a green circle next to it and instead receives an orange square, which indicates the metric needs improvement. However, when looking at the lab data, we can see the LCP is 4.9 seconds and gets a red triangle, which is within the poor benchmark range. So over the last 28 days, the LCP has been performing better than when I did this test. This may only be a blip, or it may indicate that recent changes to the web page or web server have resulted in a lower LCP score. Now, if we return to the field data and look at first input delay, we can see a score of 18 milliseconds, which is in the good range, so we can see a green circle next to it. However, if we head over to the lab data, you won't find the FID metric there. That's because FID relies on aggregated user interactions, which are hard to simulate in a lab environment. Instead, Google creates an equivalent metric called total blocking time, which you should use instead. In this case, TBT gets a score of 100 milliseconds and a green circle next to it, so that's within the good range. Now, back to the field data, and this time for cumulative layout shift. We can see it gets a 0.2 result and an orange square, which indicates it needs improvement to make the good 0.1 or under threshold. For lab data, the CLS gets 0 and a green circle, which is good. Now, the overall page speed score is actually calculated from 6 metrics, which you can see in the lab data. But in this video, I'm focusing on the free Core Web Vitals, which is the second part of a 5-part video series I'm running on Page Experience. If you want to find out more about the other metrics like first contentful paint, speed index, and time to interactive, let me know in the comments below and I'll see if I can create a future video on them. And if you want to explore exactly how the performance score is calculated and weighted, Google provides a great resource. So you can see largest contentful paint gets 25% of the weighting. Total blocking time also gets 25%, which is a lab metric that's equivalent to first input delay. So that's 50% for the first 2 Core Web Vital metrics. And what about the other Core Web Vital? Well, cumulative layout shift only gets 5%. I guess that's because this is Google's page speed performance score, so a shift in layout isn't going to affect the speed that much, but it does affect usability. Google is highlighting it as an important user experience metric. Okay, so let's scoot back to the performance score for the Web Vitals tools page. Now, because the largest contentful paint has a red triangle next to it, it's considered a poor score, and in fact, it's the only lab metric that's considered poor. And we know LCP accounts for 25% of the performance weighting score, So improving this will make the most significant impact in getting a higher Google PageSpeed Insights score. But how do you know what needs improving? Well, if we scroll down, Google provides an opportunities and diagnostics section below. Each section details areas of the page that can be improved, and they're ordered by priority. So in the case of the opportunities section, fixing the suggestions with a red triangle has the potential to improve the performance of the page the most. For example, Google is suggesting to defer off-screen images. When I open the toggle, we can see more advice like the specific images that need attention and that lazy loading the images is the fix required. If you're unsure about a suggestion, you can click the Learn More link. Okay, there's one more thing I want to cover before I go. When interviewed, Google's John Mueller hinted that all 3 Core Web Vitals must be met to qualify for a ranking boost. So all 3 vitals must get a green circle next to them in your PageSpeed Insights scores. That's quite a big task, but John also added that he wasn't sure exactly how the final scores would be calculated and that there may be some room for nearly good scores. So now that you know what the Core Web Vitals are, why they're important, and how to measure them, I expect you'll be wondering how you can improve them. Well, I'll be covering this in our next 3 videos, starting with largest contentful paint. So be sure to subscribe on our YouTube channel or head over to tribeseo.com/email and you'll be notified as soon as they're ready. Okay, I'm Joe Williams from Tribe SEO and I'll see you in the next one.